I just want to thank you all for coming. I see so many regular faces, and we really appreciate your loyalty to the museum. First, please, if you haven't made it up to the museums, go on up and see our new exhibits. Always changing. Not a member, please consider joining. There's a lot of benefits to membership, so we'll talk about that later. So this Launchpad lecture is going to be held by Mike Shinabery, our Education Director, and it's about the origins of the museum. In October of 1976, it all began. Before that, though, former mayor and resident Dwight Ohlinger had a dream to create an International Space Hall of Fame and to rival that of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Mike Shinabery is going to tell us all about how the museum came about. A little note about Mike. Mike started his career as a teenage disc jockey in Lima, Ohio on WTGN. So get ready for an entertaining lecture. Not only that, but he also worked in radio in Los Angeles, locally still does, and he worked on television ads. Some of them are quite comical. Anyway, then he came to New Mexico and covered military news with the Alamogordo Daily News, and that's how the doors opened for him to work with the New Mexico Museum of Space History. Let's take a moment to give him a hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming. It's always good to see friends and new faces as well. And as Olga mentioned, we are going to look at the origins of the New Mexico Museum of Space History. One of the questions that I get most asked, and in fact, we gave a tour yesterday to folks from all over the world who are here in our community for the International Remote Viewing Association conference. They're meeting today and this weekend in Cloudcroft. They ask the question that I most often hear is, why is this museum even here? And this is how it started. Right here, a big patch of land and a Sharpie. So why is this institution even here? We are a couple of days hard drive from Houston, where NASA is. We are a long way from Florida. We're a long way from Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. And certainly none of that really has any close connection to us here. So we're going to answer that question today. Everybody thinks that the race to space started in 1958 and 1957, when the Soviets, during the International Geophysical Year, sent up Sputnik. We were, yes, in a race to see who could get the first artificial satellite into space. We have one of two or three original Sputniks on display in our museum. Only that small amount of number are left. And so they got Sputnik up, and everybody said, that's the start of the race, 1958. NASA comes out of the old National Aeronautics Committee, NACA, which President Wilson signed into effect when he was president. And all of a sudden, we're in the space age. In reality, it starts here in the Tularosa Basin. In 1945, German scientists started to arrive along with 300 railroad cars of rocket parts. And we began to put rockets together to go to space. It was always Wernher von Braun's desire, and that's pretty well documented, to go to space with any new technology. Often it gets weaponized, but his desire and those of those around him was to go to space. So in early 1942, White Sands Missile Range became an entity. A lot of land from ranchers was confiscated. This is the Burris Ranch that is still out on White Sands Missile Range. And our history is documented by a musician. Some of you might have known him, Calvin Bowles, who owned a record label here in Alamogordo called Yucca Records. He recorded such persons as Willie Nelson and Bobby Fuller, before they became famous, did it in his garage, did it at one of the radio stations here. And one of his songs tells the story of how we got to the space age in southeast New Mexico, called From Arrows to Rockets. Even earlier than that, in 1930, Robert Goddard, the father of liquid fuel rocketry, comes to New Mexico. And he did so thanks to, you see the photograph on the left here, thanks to Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh sought Goddard out and wanted to know if this new technology of rocketry would be able to allow airplanes to lift off of ships. And Goddard was doing his experimentation in Massachusetts. As you can imagine, this was more than 100 years ago. And with that new technology, rockets are loud. They crash. Things catch on fire. And the Massachusetts fire marshal came to Goddard and said, "You cannot do that in the state anymore." So Goddard and Lindbergh started to look around. Where could they go where there was lots of land, a small community? They could experiment to their heart's content. And Lindbergh went to Harry Guggenheim and got $100,000 grant for him to move to Roswell, New Mexico. So our space history actually goes back more than a century. And by the 1960s, White Sands Missile Range was a huge entity in the creation of experimentation in rocketry and other things to be able to allow mankind to go beyond the bounds of our atmosphere. And of course, we all know in 1945, the Trinity site test, which ended the war with Japan and literally changed the world. German scientists came, as I said, in September of 1945, which it presents an interesting dichotomy. There's some belief that the Germans accessed more than 200 of Robert Goddard's patents, the majority from experimentation that he did here in New Mexico. They were public. But he died a month before they arrived, so the two never were able to meet up and discuss rocketry. But it's an important piece of the puzzle in space history. And before long, White Sands Missile Range is where the premier rocket testing facility in the United States. We even tested, we have this out in our rocket park. This is the Little Joe 2. It was used to test the escape systems for Apollo astronauts. If there was an abort, the device you see on top of the capsule would pull the capsule away and safely bring them back down to Earth. As I said, worked perfectly in testing. Fortunately, that never had to be used in an actual rocket launch. All the Apollo launches went, for the most part, pretty well. And now there's a marker out there denoting White Sands Missile Range as the birthplace of the modern missile. In 1963, our governor, Jack Campbell, even went so far as to send a letter to President Kennedy asking him to denote White Sands as the spaceport of the United States. We had years of documentation that would attest to the safety and what we could accomplish in that arena. But a couple of things stymied that. One, Florida politically had, at the time, better politicians and better lobbyists. And two, it ends up on President Kennedy's desks, and not long after he was assassinated. And so this actually never went anywhere, unfortunately. For those of you who from time to time might drive the road between Las Cruces and Alamogordo, Highway 70, that is not where the road originally was. The road was actually moved to keep prying eyes away from some of the rocket experimentation that was going on. I'll tell you who recognized that White Sands was a spaceport and the importance of space history in New Mexico long before the rest of the country did, and that was the science fiction writers. They often wrote stories. In fact, there's one in this Amazing Stories magazine right here. They often wrote stories where White Sands would be where the rockets to the moon took off. So, We have White Sands. We have Holloman Air Force Base. That came into being just weeks after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. A lot of ranchers donated their property to that effort. It's still, of course, an active part of our community. There's a real interesting story with that. During the early part of the war years, bomber crews would train out of this facility. At the time, it was known as the Alamogordo Army Airfield. And one of those gentlemen who came to Alamogordo to train was none other than George Wallace. He was accepted by the Army Air Forces for pilot training. Subsequently, he suffered with spinal meningitis. It destroyed the hearing in one of his ears and some of his eyesight. So he was moved over into a position as a flight engineer. And in that position, he would fly bombing raids on Japan under the direction of General Curtis LeMay. That would eventually become an issue of national prominence when in 1968, George Wallace runs for governor. Guess who his vice president is? General LeMay, Curtis LeMay. A lot of historians will tell you LeMay had a brilliant career, and this probably kind of was a detriment to the career that he had in his lifetime by running for vice president with the likes of someone such as George Wallace. If you get a chance today or another day, go up to our second floor and look at our recently installed remote control, radio controlled airplanes. There is a display on Reginald Denny here. Reginald Denny was a World War I pilot. And he was also an actor, and he was a very good actor. He immigrated to the United States. He became a United States citizen. He opened up an airplane hobby shop on Hollywood Boulevard. And from there, he founded a company called Radioplane. And he developed an OQ drone that was tested out here at Holloman as a target. If you have never seen Reginald Denny act, he was character and second banana to famous 1930s, 1940s actors, and he was in the movie Anna Karenina, if you've ever seen that. But what I remember is his last movie in 1966, the Batman movie, where he played the Commodore right here. So if you've ever seen that, you are looking at a man who created a drone that was tested as a target right here in Alamogordo, New Mexico. John Stapp tested seatbelts here after his momentous ride in December of 1954. This is Stapp actually doing his testing. He was pulled back by a cable. The cable was not released, but the chair was released and it would come to a dead stop and he would go flopping all over the place. If you've seen the film, you know that. You can find that online, by the way. And every time you get into your vehicle and put on a seatbelt, it's because John Stapp did this in September of 1956. Ham and Enos, as we know, they trained here for their flights. Ham before Alan Shepard went up, and Enos before John Glenn did his orbital flight, the first American to do so around the planet Earth. We had pilots who tested in this community, such as Demi McClure here, Dr. David Simons, to be able to do that, to do the balloons that they ascended in Man High and Excelsior. They had to learn how to fly those balloons. And this picture right here is from the Dave Simons private family collection. When he passed away, a lot of that material was donated to us. Duke Gildenberg lived in Tularosa. He was the weather person. But those flights, which put Dave Simons as the first man to spend a night in space, the training was done here in Alamogordo. And then, of course, we all know about Joe Kittinger, who did his ascent from 102,800 feet to test parachute systems and survived 3 of those jumps. So with all of that, where do you think the birthplace of space actually took place long before 1958? It was in the Tularosa Basin, White Sands Missile Range, Alamogordo, New Mexico, Holloman Air Force Base. With all of that information, Dwight Ohlinger, who was the mayor of Alamogordo, and a business, one day in 1973, got this idea. All of that took place here, let's build an International Space Hall of Fame. And he talked about it at a public event. Almost immediately, Dr. John Stapp signed on to that, became very as did Dr. Ernst Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe pilot who came over after World War II as part of Operation Paperclip, was chief rocket scientist at Holloman for many, many years, and also taught at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but for the majority of his life, he would call Alamogordo home. From there, they got the interest of one of our legislators, Aubrey Dunn, and a local lawyer, George Fettinger, who took that information to Governor Bruce King. And within a couple of days, Bruce King signed a state proclamation supporting the International Space Hall of Fame. I actually have copies of that proclamation at the back. If you'd like one, feel free to take it. So Governor King signs the proclamation. It gets sent off to a very young senator at the time, Pete Domenici, who enters it into the congressional record in support of a Space Hall of Fame. So we've come full circle here. We've got the idea, we got the support of some major space personalities. We have the support of our local legislators, the governor. There's the congressional record there. And what happens? The governor decides to form a committee. And he puts Dwight Ohlinger in charge. So we started with Dwight with the idea. It went this circle within a few weeks, and now there's an official committee, and Dwight Ohlinger is in charge of that committee with the International Space Hall of Fame. So our little picture of this empty plot of land out here with a Sharpie that says, here's where it's going to be, is now this huge complex that we hope will be built. And you'll notice in the 1970s, you'll see Indian Wells Drive, you'll see Scenic Drive, and pretty much, except for what appears to be a dirt road, Scenic Drive ends at New Mexico State University, Alamogordo, down here off the side of our complex. So now we have the dream, we have support, and we enter the design phase. These are some of the original drawings from the architect Charles Nolan right here. And you can see how huge it was supposed to have been. The Golden Cube, which is the museum these days, actually was going to be built on its tip and not as it stands today. But the architectural concerns at the time of support, and yes, occasionally we do have earthquake faults in this area, did not allow that to actually happen. So you'll notice that we had a Saturn V was supposed to greet visitors as they came up the hill to the museum or the Space Hall of Fame at the time. From above, you see the cube, you see where offices would be, a satellite hall, meeting rooms, an auditorium, a planetarium. This huge complex was on the drawing board. This will give you an idea of what it looked like from the side. And then some of the initial drawings. What the second floor looking at the windows would be here on the left, what the second floor looking toward the interior would be, and what the entrance would be. You'll notice that we have, and I put those circles up there, someone visiting in a fedora, someone in a cowboy hat, someone in a sombrero, and a little old lady in a bonnet. And then we have an astronaut out front who would greet people as they enter the facility. That was all on the table. And John Stapp also had dreams of a couple of things that were not in those drawings. One was to put a cafe or restaurant on the top of the building. How they were going to do that with it on its tip, I've never been able to find references to that. But he also wanted to put a gondola that would take you up to the ridge behind the museum. And you could, just as they have one in Albuquerque, you could get on that gondola and you could ride up. You'd see a view of the entire Tularosa Basin, come back down, enjoy a meal, enjoy some coffee, tea, a snack, and then tour the museum. That's the final drawing right there from the architect Charles Nolan on what the facility would look like from the front. Once it was approved, these cards with the official architect's designation then were created and sent out. Models were made at that point. You can probably imagine that at the building at this time of that model, they had abandoned the idea of putting the facility on its corner. I don't know if architecturally today they could make that happen or not. These were the various choices of the configuration of the Space Hall of Fame or the museum itself. There were numerous considerations. Would we have 2 floors? Would we have 3 floors? Would we have 4 floors or more? Would it be on its corner? Would it be flat? And then comes the day of the groundbreaking. And quite a few folks from the community, from the state level, from the national level showed up for this particular groundbreaking right here. I have to give special thanks to our curator, Bree Bowler. She got a grant, hired a couple of interns through the end of the year to take all of this material and digitize it. There is enough material on what she gave me. You could go down to New Mexico State University, Alamogordo, and teach an adult education course on the formation and the creation of the Space Hall of Fame and the museum. Now, you should probably note that the facility was not created as a museum. If you look at some of the original pictures, it was a Space Hall of Fame. Basically, you had plaques, you had displays of each inductee. Today, you walk through it and you see some large artifacts on display. Well, we have no industrial elevator. We have nothing else that could get anything large inside or outside unless you put it through the windows before you put the windows on. And when you walk through, that's how some of those artifacts actually got into the building. I've identified as many people as I can that are in these photographs. Some of them are identified on the back. On the right here, you see Aubrey Dunn. You can always tell Aubrey by his cowboy hat. He was like 6'5", 6'6". Governor Bruce King, who served as governor for quite a few terms. And you see Dr. John Stapp right over here. Came time for the actual groundbreaking. You see Dr. Steinhoff. You can always tell Dr. Steinhoff because he had sort of a hunched over pose. You see Dwight Ohlinger. It was his dream to be able to create this facility. And you see Cliff McDonald, who was a businessman for many, many years. He passed away a few years ago, I think age 95 or 96. There's a very funny story about Cliff. He was a barber in town. His wife worked at the school for the blind and visually impaired. They had a daughter who attended that particular school, which is why his wife got involved in education there. When they built the Charlie Lee Memorial Relief Route around the city, a lot of that land was the McDonald's land. And the city asked him, could you move your livestock, your cows, out of there so that it would make it easier for us to build that? Well, Cliff's a very community-oriented guy. Sure, he moved his cows out. The relief route is done. He goes to move his cows back, and the city said, oh no, we've annexed that land and you can't have livestock in the city of Alamogordo. So, you see Dr. John Stapp here. I've been unable really to identify any of the other personalities in this photograph. and then you see the actual moment of the turning of the dirt. That would be the beginning of this facility. At the end of the presentation, I have a film I'm going to show you during the construction. Somebody actually came down and took a little bit of film footage every day, and you'll be able to see it go up. But the photographs here show you starting from the first story to the second story, as it got higher and higher. I want to point out, you probably all walked the museum, the ramps that go downhill. Those were the suggestion of Dr. Steinhoff, and they mimic the ramps at the launch facilities at Peenemünde, which is on the Baltic shore, and it was the secret facility during World War II where they actually created the V2. Gets higher and higher. At the time, it was the tallest building in the area. I think it still may be. And that little patch of dry land with a Sharpie of a square box on it is now an actual facility. You can see at the time how small NMSUA actually was in that time period. So let's talk about the first director and curator. And that was G. Harry Stine. Harry Stine was an engineer. If you've ever launched a model rocket, in the 1950s, when model rocketry, as the space age ramped up, model rocketry became very popular. And he would read stories about how kids were making their own model rockets. They were exploding. Limbs would be lost. Even lives would be lost. And so if you've ever launched a model rocket, inside the rocket kit is a National Association of Rocketry Safety Code. This was the creation of G. Harry Stine. He wrote the original Handbook of Model Rocketry. It has been published regularly ever since the 1950s. And he continued to influence the hobby. So Dwight Ohlinger offered him a contract to become the director for 6 months during the actual construction of the facility. And in that 6-month period, it allowed him to learn how the facility operated. It also allowed the Space Hall of Fame members to become familiar about his style of management. And at the 6-month period, he was also a very prolific author. He wrote science fiction under his own name. He wrote science fiction under the name Lee Corey. He wrote nonfiction books. He probably has 25, 30 books out there to his name in various incarnations. He also designed the first logo, and that's it right there. He said the symbol is obviously a simplified idea. It's a simplified Zia symbol. He said it's so simple a child can draw it so that it is recognizable. It can be used on letterheads, signs, even on the side of the Space Hall of Fame building when it went up. And he said to his knowledge, and he did quite a research without the benefit of the internet at the time, he did quite a bit of research on the trademark and didn't find anything similar to it so that we could adopt this and trademark it. He also said the logo came about as a result of doodling on several sheets of paper until a particular design suddenly stood out all by itself. And that's the logo right there. The significance, the triangular symbol of the National Association of Rocketry is in there. He also developed that initial triangle. He was no stranger to developing symbols. He designed the symbol of the World Championship for Space Models, the symbol for the National Association of Rocketry, and the symbol for the 6th National Model Rocket Championships. As I said, the triangle was in there in his initial drawing, but in the final drawing he proposed, it was taken out of there. So he serves, he signs a contract. He serves as the curator and the director for a contracted 6-month period. And at the end of the 6 months, he decides not to take the position. He is, I think, 48 years old at this time. He said he's unable to accept your kind and generous offer of a full-time position. He gave actually several reasons. He lived in Arizona, couldn't sell his house, and couldn't afford 2 mortgages. His family lived in Arizona. He was informed that it was the policy of the state of New Mexico they would not pay his relocation charges. He mentioned that the contract for full-time had a clause that he could be terminated with 5 days' notice, and he was not comfortable with that whatsoever. He felt that he would not be able to perform the duties of the curator-director with regard to budgeting and defending his budgets before the state legislature. At the time, that was all under the aegis of the Space Hall of Fame, and the contract did not allow him to have any input on that. He also, as a reason, said, since there does not appear to be housing available in Alamogordo or its environs that would be within my financial needs or would be suitable to my family, he could not accept the offer here. He also said the purpose of our 6-month contract was not only to determine whether or not I liked the job, the people, and the city of Alamogordo, but also whether or not the people involved with the Space Hall of Fame Foundation liked and wanted me. As a result of the last 6 months, I have some serious doubts about the latter. He said in August of '76, when he signed the contract, that he gave his word to Dwight Ohlinger that he would continue to work to see the facility was opened October 5th of 1976, and that he would keep his word to be able to actually do that. And so he turned down the position as curator, as full-time executive director. There's his letter right there. And so we went on the hunt for a new curator-director. George House, who is our longest-serving curator, 30-some years, was chosen and set about as the initial cataloger of everything that would come in. He eventually retired, went to work at White Sands Missile Range as assistant curator, and then a few years ago passed away. He told me a funny story one time. He said, you know, he has this Middle Eastern look. And his son was actually an actor. He was in the television show Roswell. He had the same look as George. On Roswell, because of that look, he played terrorists, spies, Jews, guards, you name it. And George said, I was in the office one day working on my schedule, and a guy comes in a coat and a briefcase. He sits down, introduces himself. He worked for the CIA. They offered him a job with the CIA when he got his degree. And George, if you knew him, had a great sense of humor. He said, you know, I don't think I could kill anybody. Guy picked up his briefcase, walked out the door. So the building is now complete, and it was featured on the front of the New Mexico Architecture magazine. It would win a design award in the field of new construction that year. And launch day was now upon us to officially open on October 5th. Next year, at this time, we'll be celebrating that 50th anniversary on October 5th. I believe it's Monday next year, I think. I have talked to folks who attended this. Most of them were in the marching band that marched up Indian Wells, that marched up 2001. That is not a good memory for them. But they were there that day, so they had kind of a good recollection of a significant moment in the community of Alamogordo. By this time, Jerry Apodaca is the governor, and he sends out these invitations for folks to actually come and attend the ceremony. We opened up on this date for several particular reasons. It was chosen for actually a variety of important dates in space history. And those would include, I have a whole list right here, let me pull that out. It was the bicentennial year, if those of you who remember, old enough to remember. It was right around the birthday of Robert Goddard and the anniversary of his first liquid fuel launch. That's what got kicked him out of Massachusetts right there. It was the anniversary, plus a couple days, I believe, of the first launch of a V2 at Peenemünde. And it was the anniversary weekend of the first Sputnik launch. So that particular day was chosen because of those numerous reasons. This was the agenda for that day, typed up on an old typewriter. You see the parade there took place at 10 o'clock. There was a lunch at Chaparral Junior High School, which I think was fairly new at that time. There was the dedication ceremony at 2 o'clock. And we had a moon tree up here at one time, grown from seeds that were taken into space. Unfortunately, from what I understand, drought eventually killed that tree. So we accept the fact that the last human rode the rocket sled on the test track at Holloman Air Force Base on December the 10th of 1954. Bend the truth on that a little. The last rocket sled that John Stapp rode was in the parade in 1976. And you can see it ends right there in front of the viewing stand up here on the hill in front of the Space Hall of Fame, now the museum. A program was handed out to attendees, a welcome by Governor Jerry Apodaca. He says, "I know all of you will enjoy the opening ceremonies. Most of all, we would like to thank you for your cooperation and hard work in making this day possible for all of us." So basically, 1973 is the dream. 1976, we have this facility up and running. And Dwight Ohlinger, of course, whose idea this was, has a letter in the opening program as well. This is an opening day photograph. There is Governor Apodaca. There's Sam Graft. He was an appointee of Governor Apodaca to the New Mexico Parks and Recreation Board. And over here is U.S. Congressman Harold Reynolds on the left, who was in attendance here. A lot of thought was given to who the first inductees would actually be. I would think that John Stapp would want to be one of those inductees. But from what I've read, since he was integral in the design development phases, I don't think he felt it was appropriate that he would be included. It would be, I think, 1979 when he was actually inducted into the Hall of Fame. These are just some of the inductees. Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, both Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, and Sergei Korolev, who was the Soviets' equal to our Wernher von Braun. And he actually died a couple of years before we went to the moon. He had a tumor in his intestines. He was operated upon. It was not successful and he passed away. Robert Goddard, of course. Over here you have Willy Ley. Willy Ley was a German journalist who escaped Germany when he saw the rise to power that Adolf Hitler was undergoing. And in the late 1930s, he left Germany and immigrated to the United States. There's a very, very sad story about Ley. He was his entire career, and I have popular science magazines in my office and other magazines where he would champion going into space. Here's where we are in the space race. Here's what's happening. Here's when we could have this done by. He died 1 week before they landed on the moon. And so never got to see that dream realized. You have Max Valier right here, who built a rocket car out of space technology, crashed it and passed away. You have Herman Oberth and Werner von Braun, who were both inducted. If any of you are teachers, there is a great story between these two right here. Oberth, in 1922, wrote his doctoral thesis on how man would one day go to space. And his advisors looked at it and said, yeah, right. And at that time, turned him down for his doctorate. Frustrated, in 1923, he published his doctoral thesis as a book. Von Braun was around 11 or 12 years old, and he read it and got all excited. And 6 or 7 years later, he was building rockets for the German army. That's how important a teacher's influence can actually be. Von Braun underwent that experience of learning how to build rockets as a teenager. He came from a rather aristocratic family, and he would build these rockets and set them off in the downtown center areas of where they lived, and they would destroy things, and his dad would have to pay for it. But he read that book, he decided to learn how to do that technology, and before he's even out of his teens, he is building rockets for his country. And then Fritz Zwicky, who's a very controversial character. You might look him up and read. People either like Fritz or they don't like Fritz. So over the years, what changes have we undergone? These are some of the different looks that the museums have. We were the Space Hall of Fame. Then we were the Space Center. People around town still call it the Space Center. When I believe it was Bill Richardson was governor, he changed it to the New Mexico Museum of Space History. And that's what we are now. But the Space Hall of Fame is still active and encompassed within the auspices as a partner with the New Mexico Museum of Space History. They help to fund education, they put on events throughout the year, and so the Space Hall of Fame is not going away. It's still very active here 49 years later. Subsequent years saw additional events as well. We had a local very active stamp club at the time, and in 1977 they honored the Space Hall of Fame with several special cancellations. I'll show you some of those in a minute. Some of the folks who've visited us, Dr. Harrison Jack Smith, he was inducted in 1977. That gentleman, I took this picture, that gentleman looking at the rock, that's Bill Kraft. He campaigned for years to have a Star Trek stamp several decades ago. And he got people to write letters, and the post office just blew him off. And so finally one day, he said, maybe we need a letter from God. And that's the title of his book, explaining the whole process about how the the first Star Trek space stamps came about. They were touring the museum, and I had a camera, and I thought, this is a once-in-a-chance opportunity to get the guy who brought this space rock back from the moon and the guy who got the Star Trek stamp to be in existence. So the local stamp club put out these in subsequent years. You see Dr. Steinhoff on a local first day cover. You see Ed Mitchell, who was born in Roswell and was a graduate, I believe, of Artesia High School. So he comes from New Mexico. There's Dr. Steinhoff when he was inducted into the Space Hall of Fame. As I said, you could always tell him by his little hunched forward pose right there. Dr. Steinhoff was a genius in aeronautics. In 1938, he, Hitler, and the head of Pina Mundi were flying to Berlin to present the progress of rocketry to Adolf Hitler. And Steinhoff, in 1938, had developed a beacon system that a plane could fly itself. They initiated a beacon in Berlin. He got the plane in the air and left the cockpit until it came time to bring it down. That's how intelligent that man was. On the other side of the coin, speed limits meant nothing to him. I've had people who knew him said even his wife would not get in the car with him. Clyde Tombaugh was an inductee in 1980. You can see how much the facility, how different it looked as a Space Hall of Fame versus an actual museum setting. Paul Haney was inducted in 1993. He was the voice of NASA. He owned a cherry farm here when he retired in High Rolls and then moved down to Alamogordo. He was hired on at NASA shortly after the agency's creation. We inducted Susan Helms in 2004. There is a story that one of our volunteers, Charlie Ferrant, told me one time, and she holds a record that no other astronaut holds. To lessen bone mass loss during extended periods in space, astronauts are required to do exercise. Normally, they have a bicycle, stationary bicycle. She was a runner. She liked to run. And so she would undertake every day a period of running. It takes about 92 minutes to orbit the Earth. Every 45 minutes you see a sunrise, every 45 minutes you see a sunset. She runs for 94 minutes, 2 minutes longer than the orbit of the Earth. She holds a certificate as the only woman ever to run around the world. And then Peter Diamandis from the X Prize, we inducted him in 2014. Some of the local personage you see, Dwight Harp, who is head of the Small Business Development Center in the back, and Joan Griggs over here, whose husband was a senator. This is the only man who has ever been taken out of the Space Hall of Fame. And that took place in 2006. I found this picture online of Hubertus Strughold with Bob Hope, no explanation of why. I just find it interesting. So Strughold was responsible for helping to develop our interior spacesuits and the interior of the capsules. He was very knowledgeable in that area and was in this area for a time and then retired to Arizona. In 2006, it came out that he oversaw a program in Nazi Germany where they were trying to figure out better ways to allow their pilots to survive if they crashed into water. So they would take prisoners from the concentration camps and put them into water and near freeze them to death. In some cases, they actually froze them to death and tried to revive them. And so he was taken out of the Hall of Fame here. His name was taken off of a military building in San Antonio and a military building at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. But our local stamp group put this out when he was inducted in 1978. I want to spend the last couple of minutes here talking about our volunteers, because this institution would not run without some incredible volunteers we've had over the years in my 19 and a half years here. There was a gentleman whose name I just can't remember, but when I started here, he was the guy. He would come in and stuff envelopes in the education office. And he was the guy that designed the explosive experiments that were set off after Apollo 17 lifted off the moon. They hit a button, there was an explosion. They were trying to see how that would affect the lunar surface. And I asked him one day, I said, "You've got this incredible career. Do you not want to talk to kids?" He goes, "No, I didn't blow up the moon. I'm satisfied." And then his wife passed away, and every week he'd drive to Rodoso to eat at Slotsky's. But we have Mike Smith on the right here. We have Wayne Matson next to him. Mike was a friend, personal friend of Clyde Tombaugh's. He worked at range control at White Sands at Holloman Air Force Base. Wayne was a naval graduate at Annapolis and flew secret missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail during Vietnam. Their airplane was hit didn't go down, but he carried shrapnel in his lungs for the rest of his life. They couldn't take it out or it would have killed him. But he also worked at Nellis, and we would say, Wayne, what did you see at Area 51? And he gave probably the most honorable response. He said, I took an oath of office. I can't tell you. Besides, you wouldn't believe it anyway. We have Charlie over here. Some of these others are identified in subsequent photographs. Second from the left there is Paul Vignault. He was the first Hawk missile instructor at Fort Bliss, and after a 20-year career, worked with the Hawk missile with Raytheon and traveled the world teaching bases how to deploy that missile. And then Dygert, Howard Hallmark, he was close to 100, I think, when he passed away. Joe Bridgeforth, maybe you knew some of these folks. Harold Teeter, who would come up and talk about Sputnik. He had some kind of aerospace relation to that. Dorothy Hampton, who was a longtime volunteer for us. Vince Overling, Bill English. Bill, you still sitting back there? Yep. Most of these guys have passed away. Bill is fortunately still with us. Bill's a veteran, too. You see Rick Berry at the back. Rick was on our foundation, I believe, for a while. I think he still may be. And then you see Charlie here. Charlie was in the Navy. He taught at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab in Houston. And he helped, from what I understand, to develop the flotation collar. He pulled astronauts out of Apollo capsules. He had a story he told us one time that they opened the hatch to an Apollo capsule. It was so rank, after nearly 2 weeks in there, they threw up on them. Apparently, when you're in that atmosphere, it's like watching an episode of Hoarders. You just don't really notice it. And there's some more of Charlie. We like to honor our volunteers. We throw quarterly meetings, birthday parties. And I said to Charlie one time, at your birthday, I'm going to throw you a party. If you do, I'll quit. So I never offered him another birthday party again. He was an amazing person. Here he is. He was a friend of Konrad Dannenberg's, who was a German rocket engineer. And Dannenberg came to visit us one time, and there's a picture in front of the V2 of which Dannenberg was a part. But Charlie especially, I think, liked to work with kids. Ed Dittmer, who trained Ham. That, I believe, is Ed's induction moment up there into the International Space Hall of Fame. He would come up here and love to talk to people, especially kids as well. These volunteers we had just wanted to inspire the next generation. And there's Mike Mullane, who flew 3 missions on the shuttle.
Tell him who's in the monkey suit, Mark.
So the chimp suit is my daughter. We needed a mascot one day. She was the only one who'd fit the uniform. But all of these famous people would come, and they wanted their picture with Ham. Now, this photograph is another one of those amazing rare opportunity photographs. At the DCX reunion, Delta Clipper in 2008, we had the head of NASA at that time fly into the airport here, drive to the Tay Center across the street to give the luncheon talk. And when he was done, he drove back to the airport and left. But we had arranged for him to honor these 3 volunteers right here. And you see photograph I took just at the moment the head of NASA mentions their name and calls them up to get their honor. So that is the presentation. A couple more things really quickly. I have a 1.5-minute video of film. Somebody came down here and every day took a few feet of film. So Paul, would you show the film of the Space Hall of Fame being erected? And then we have one more quick thing. OSHA would not be happy. I don't know what that tree is. The filmmaker would get very creative. There was actually another 3 minutes of this that I edited out. I didn't think you'd want to see pictures of ants in their anthills. And there it is. So that's the story of 49 and counting. And really quickly here, I have some cool prizes to give away. You have to answer trivia questions. So at the beginning of this talk, I had a picture up there that showed a comet over the Museum of Space History. Who can tell me what that comet was?
Do I count or should I? Okay.
Oh, no, you don't count.
Oh, okay.
Well, you count, but not today. Anybody take a wild guess? That's it. So here's a picture of Hale-Bopp. Who can tell me what year the shuttle landed for the one and only time at White Sands? Here's a button from that event. Now, the next one is for kids only because the guy who gave me these said it could be for kids only. We got some kids over here, I think. Ham. What does that name stand for? H-A-M. I hear whispering. Holloman Aeromed, yes. Before he passed away, I went to Ed Dittmer and I said, a gentleman that was here, he'd like to have your autograph. Could you sign a picture of Ham? And I could mail it to him. Before he was done, he gave me an entire envelope full of pictures. So I have just a few left to give out at special occasions, and this one is yours. Well, come on down and get it. All right, thank you very much. Real quickly, any questions? Yes, Donna.
In the beginning, you said the initial spaceport or something was in Roswell, and then we started talking about Wismar. How did we get from Roswell over here?
Well, Jack Campbell, the governor, wanted to make White Sands the spaceport in 1963. And that's what he proposed to John Kennedy. Roswell was where Robert Goddard went to do his rocket experiments. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't think it's there anymore. I think it was destroyed in the flood. Everybody goes to Roswell to see the aliens. If you ever went to the Roswell Museum and Art Center, he was a Rotarian. After he passed away, they took all of his tools and recreated his lab in the Roswell Museum and Art Center. So if you had a chance to see that, if not, you can find photographs online. Goddard built 20th century technology with 19th century tools.
All of his equipment and materials have been shared with various organizations for restoration since the flood in Roswell a couple of years ago. So the plans are at some point in time that it will be returned and restored.
That, I think, was the lowest point in that building, and that's where all the mud went. Yeah. Thank you, April. Yes?
What happened to all the grandeur plans? It was going to be so big. What happened to
Money. This was a city effort, and eventually the state took it over, but it was a city effort. Would it not look cool to see a Saturn V as you went up the hill? So yeah, that was basically it, money.
And then when you said the Queen went in and met him, where was that at?
That was in England at the ITV television network that Paul Haney got a job at after he got crosswise with somebody at NASA. Paul Haney was a neat guy, funny sense of humor, very opinionated.
And then when you said that the guy was taken out of induction or whatever, was it because he was helping the Germans?
It was because of what the program he oversaw did to the concentration camp prisoners. They put them in these situations and basically they died. So yes, it was, that research was done by the Anti-Defamation League, and they presented evidence to all the different entities around the country, and so we decommissioned him. Yes?
Okay, when I worked at the university, the rumor was when they were digging for the museum that one of the Tonka toys, whatever those things are called, hit a bed of rattlesnakes, and there were thousands of rattlesnakes when they dug into it, went woo all over everywhere.
That's funny you should mention that. We, education team here recently took a day and went bowling out at the bowling alley. And some guy sits down and he said, I was a kid when they built that facility. And I met John Stapp, I met all these people. He said, when the first bucket went in, it came up full of rattlesnakes. He said they called a botanist not a botanist, but a herpetologist from NMSU in Las Cruces who flew up here and identified at least 6 different kinds of rattlesnakes, which is rare. They just don't live together. And there were just thousands. I think he told us 60,000 snakes that they estimated were in that pit, that over the entire area there underground.
What happened to the snakes? They ran away?
If you really want to know, it's not pretty.
They lived on a farm somewhere?
Yes, yes, yes.
Ask me afterward, I'll tell you afterward. Yeah, it's not pretty. Thank you for coming. Visit some of those exhibits up there. You'll be able to learn more about radio control, of which Bill is a part of. His dad, I think, actually helped to found that industry here in this area. So thank you very much. We appreciate you coming. Who's up next?